fine.
Really? Just no changes, disaster.
All right, we got 5 minutes.
And now I'm nervous. Thanks, Lissa.
All right, that noise.
This is always me trying to get it together.
Yes, sir.
How are you doing? Good.
I'm going to get some water, Greta. Can I get you anything? Coffee, tea.
I'm good. Thanks.
When I first got here, you know, just take 3, take 4, and do what? Never sleep, never eat, never see your family.
Hi, Dr. Burns.
Hi, Dr. Burns.
Yeah, lots of
No one's sitting on either side of me. Where's Trey? That's what I said. I thought you didn't understand what I said. I'll bet. This is great. I'm good. Dr. Burns, this is like having like my dad. For support.
Hi, everybody. Some familiar faces. Yay.
I'll come up with a topic for next semester so you can be here.
Okay.
You gave
We
me,
could do a workshop.
you gave me a validation when I gave that presentation a couple of years ago about
Yeah.
Proudhon. And I thought I just not done a good job. And then you came up and said, okay, how important this was, and you made me feel so better.
The way you brought the communitarianism through from Buber's I and Thou all the way up to Dr. King, it was brilliant. I just like, I don't know why what was going on with the crowd that day, but I was like, that's, yeah.
Because I just thought and really made me feel
Maybe it's because not everybody's an anarchist, so it was hard.
Buber or Proudhon.
All right, well, it's 9:31, so this is a perfect time to start. My I'm a third-year student at Canadian and Ethical and Creative Leadership with a specialization in Martin Luther King Jr. Studies. My panelists are on the screen and right here in the corner. So, Greta, you want to introduce yourself?
I'm Greta Enriquez. I am cohort 17. So I'm not sure I've met most of you. In Humanities and Culture, with the Women and Gender Studies and Creative Writing certifications. And I am very close to finishing my dissertation. That's kind of where I'm at.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Mary Burden. I've been here for a minute, so I'm gonna say cohort 20. ECL concentration, MLK specialization, pastor, student, trying to get sleep and food all at the same time.
Thanks, Mary. One second. Can somebody try to get the camera, like maybe pointing towards the panelists so Greta can see her. It's right there. I wonder if it'll reach to the table.
This one here.
Oh, there we go. There, now she can.
Hey.
Katie Brown, cohort 26 is my second residency. In my traditional life, I work as a recruiter. I work for a nonprofit consultant, founder of Volunteer While Black, and I'm also a creative writer, poet, ECL, MLK specialization, and also creative writing certificate.
As of yesterday.
Yeah.
Can you hear us okay, Greta?
I can.
You'll find out more, will be revealed as we go on as to why this selection of people I thought was a great combo for this subject. What each person here does has been, a therapist, a pastor, an artist, and all three are social justice students. So hopefully you'll see some, some commonality and enough disparate experience that it'll pull together in the way that I'm hoping. Okay, so let me just read you a quick introduction that I've prepared, and then I'll hand it over to Greta to get started. Anger gets a bad rap. It's associated with violence, impulsivity, and the possibility of being out of control. I'm here in defense of anger to tell you, don't blame anger. It's not anger's fault that people don't know what to do with it. Anger exists on the same spectrum of emotion as joy, melancholy, apathy, exuberance, and best of all, love. When we feel happy, there's a wide range of ways to express it, most of which won't get you in trouble. In contrast, anger is an emotion that most people would rather distance themselves from. Grown-ups should model for us as kids the ways in which we can coexist with our anger. However, whether through a wrongful expression or repression, anger only tends to exist as a looming shadow in our everyday lives. Now, I'm talking, of course, about our quote, generic Western culture, which is, you know, white, cis, hetero, male owned and operated. Incidentally, the impetus that sparked this presentation was a reaction in me to a series of events in which I was told by white men that he wasn't comfortable using the word anger, or a certain phrasing that implies hostility and anger made him uncomfortable. I'm working on being compassionate towards that and towards their experience, but really in my blood, I want to rage against the feeling of being censored. In this culture, many of us are taught that anger is the enemy. We're conditioned to believe expressed anger represents a lack of control, and that this inability to self-regulate is shameful. Because after all, what do red-blooded Americans value better than control? I'm here to argue that this cultural stigma and censorship of anger is associated, often leads to the unhealthy internalization of shame, and therefore eventually a dangerous and explosive response. I ask you to consider for a second that the fact that virtually every single mass shooting is committed by a white man. In 2019, a group of researchers published a report on how Inuit parents support their children in American emotional development with a distinct and unique focus on anger. Anthropologist Jean Briggs spent time with an Inuit community in the Arctic, noticing the very obvious and natural differences between her culture and their own regarding emotional expression. She noticed that unlike herself, as a Westerner, as a mainland Westerner, no matter what crime or mistakes had taken place, adults in this community never expressed angry behaviors or actions, even when they felt them. As Briggs observed the tenderness that parents would show their small children, she noticed that they were very deliberate in not only showing their children the consequences of unbridled anger, but to model emotional regulation for them by refusing to act angrily themselves. So mind you, it wasn't that they were teaching anger was bad, they were teaching them how to process it. Today we're going to talk about anger, our responses to it, and about its potential to help us become better at solving problems and ultimately to be more responsible as global citizens.
Oh, it's my turn? Is it my turn?
Go ahead.
Okay. So in the world of mental health, anger is one of the most highly referred emotional states without there actually being a diagnosis that covers angry. There are diagnoses that cover sadness, that cover anxiety and fear, that cover even too much joy, what we would call elevated states or mania. But anger is seen as a terrible emotional place because it is so often associated with acts of aggression. And when we get into spaces where the emotion and the behavior are so tied together, we start to criminalize the emotional state on top of the behavioral aspects that go along with certain emotional states. In psychotherapy, we look at anger as a secondary emotion. There are three primary emotions, typically. All other emotions come from these four, okay? So we have sadness, joy, and fear, the secondary emotion of anger, and all other emotions are a combination of those. Curiosity is joy and anger. Love has bits of fear actually attached to the emotional state of love, not the act and choice of love. So when we talk about anger management or anger regulation, the first step is to actually understand where the emotions come from and how it impacts our thoughts and behaviors. So everything that we know in our bodies, we learn through our senses. And the sympathetic nervous system, which runs throughout your body alongside your motor neurons, is responsible for keying up the body in response to certain stimuli. And these responses are sent then to the hindbrain, our reptilian brain, and into the limbic system, where our flight or fight response is then generated. If certain stimuli is perceived as scary by the body, the mind develops a response to those sensations. All emotional states are actually interpretations of these sensations, whether they are remembrances of past sensations or actually happening in the moment. When the limbic system becomes involved, there are aspects in the body that that begin to happen. Heart rate increases, dilation of, constriction of blood vessels. Your digestive system stops. The term having the shit scared out of you is for real because everything gets emptied out. And then the limbic system then decides whether or not to pass on the information into the frontal lobe where our higher order reasoning happens. If something is perceived as too painful by the limbic system, that information is not passed on to the frontal lobe. In fact, the nucleus accumbens, which is the sort of relay station for all sensory information in the body, shuts itself down. So there is a feedback loop from the midbrain down into the body to perpetuate this elevated physical state. Now, your frontal lobe does not like to be inactive. So it starts to create a story around how we are supposed to handle what's going on in our bodies. If the body can then be soothed, the parasympathetic nervous system can then take over and heart rate slows and the blood vessels dilate and digestive resumes. The body then feels safe and calm. And the information that the limbic system hadn't been sending to the frontal lobe can then be processed. So choices and courses of behavior and planning and problem solving can all occur. Anger, as the secondary emotion, is our response to fear and sadness, and in some cases, too much joy. We see this especially with little kids when they get really excited and then they start acting out. It's because they've been overwhelmed. So anger takes over to bubble wrap the pain that gets associated with states of sadness, fear, and joy. When we don't recognize that our system has become overwhelmed and that anger has taken over as a bubble wrapping for this associated pain, we stigmatize the anger because we shouldn't feel that way. It's not right, it's not okay. Because we have so tied acts of aggression to the state of feeling angry. When in actuality, what the anger's job is to do is to, one, give you a notification mentally and physically that some boundary that you hold has been crossed. It doesn't tell you who's crossed the boundary or how it's been crossed, but that somewhere along the line, fear, sadness, or too much joy was triggered, which causes the body to go, whoa, I'm looking for some homeostasis. I like a little risk, but I'm looking for some evenness here. So anger comes along to try to contain what the brain has decided is too painful to manage at the moment. We have in psychotherapy, and the court system tends to make use of this thing called anger management. Now, anger management is not the diminishment or the eradication of the emotion of anger in the person. Rather, anger management focuses on recognizing where that trigger has happened and how to develop coping skills in a problem-solving process to use that anger effectively. Anger is the emotional state that is associated with our flight or fight response. It is letting us know that something's going on that we need to protect ourselves from. So when we move into spaces of anger, and what we are experiencing is our psyche's attempt to eradicate cognitive dissonance. So cognitive dissonance is a state that your beliefs or the way you think the world works and the way it's actually happening don't match. Okay. Now the levels and layers of anger can go from very, very mild, feeling bothered or irritated, to very, very big, like fury and rage. There are degrees in between. When we're bothered, we have this sense that something's off, but it's not so much for us to do something about. And as we move up through irritated, annoyed, indignant, frustrated, infuriated, hostile, full of wrath, fury, and rage, when that anger isn't dealt with in the lower stages, we get more and more wrapped in this sense of injustice that's happened. So when we approach anger management, it is to give us the tools so we don't get to the violent, aggressive, acting out stages, but that we can use that sense of injustice effectively to manage our emotional, mental, and behavioral states. There was a study released 2 days ago that looked at pain and its how do we manage chronic pain and how do we manage pain in general. And they found one of the most effective coping tools for pain was to engage in altruistic behavior. Help your neighbor, essentially. And if anger is our bubble wrap to pain, then our states of anger should actually encourage us to make connection and help each other. And so part of developing coping skills to manage anger has been ask for what you need, set your boundaries, and be responsible and accountable to your part. If we can do those things, we can use our anger to right the injustice of the boundary crossing that we've experienced. And that's all I got.
Thank you for that.
Wow. I'm nowhere near that technical. I live in a space of, I work with a lot of young people who are trained, like you said, to not have anger or they don't know how to process anger. And I grew up not understanding how to process anger to where I internalized it like really deep. And I grew up in a household, my mother and my grandmother, they fought about everything. So I always promised to never deal with women that was going to argue with me about something. Because I didn't want that in my house, right? And so it was like, but I also avoided being angry. And I was just packing it in. And so as an artist, I was always like look for ways of expression, and I didn't truly comprehend it when I was younger of how to do it. So I would act out and use my rage in different ways. And so I just want to represent artists here and start with Stan Lee. To me, he represented anger in the most genius way with one of his biggest characters who would say, "You're not gonna like me when I'm angry." The Hulk. And so we saw what the Hulk was with unbridled anger and what he would do. And we also got to see the Hulk with control anger. Right? And so you got to see Doc as the doctor, mild-mannered, cool, and all this. But he wasn't as effective as he was when he was using his anger in a healthy way. Stan Lee was brilliant in that, using cartoons or using comic books and characters to show us how to build ourselves, right? And I go from Stan Lee to another person I feel as an artist. He's on the basketball court. Michael Jordan. The Detroit Pistons created these things called the Jordan rules, where they would physically terrorize Michael Jordan, like for real, like beat him down, knock him down, he was skinny. Michael Jordan talked about how that summer He was so mad, he went to the gym and he put on 30 pounds of muscle. Right? And Michael Jordan used that anger that he had for the Detroit Pistons to go on and become Michael Jordan. Winning 6 championships, doing all this and that, because the Detroit Pistons literally beat him into being angry and creating the greatest player in the history of basketball. And using artistry that pretty much lifted the NBA from what it was to pretty much where it is today, that people can become billionaires playing basketball. Healthy anger. Then I take it to myself to where I am right now in this life. And 2018 was the roughest year for me emotionally, right? And I could have said it was 2013. I lost my sister. My mom found my sister 23 years old, dead in her apartment. She was in there for 2 days with her 2 kids. One was 4 months old, one was 1 year old, right? And so I've had those 2 kids ever since. But my mom called me when she found them. I didn't get angry. I didn't even know how to process it at that point, because in my life up to that point, I told myself and I trained myself to be logical and figure out what I needed to do next. So I didn't even understand how to grieve when my sister was found dead. I quickly went for how do I get to Texas right now and set stuff up for these kids and also plan a funeral. And spent the next 2 years not really grieving and packing that anger in of losing or not processing when my 23-year-old sister was dead when I thought I would be the one who never could see the age of 40, right? And I literally had to go back within myself and think about how I would respond to my parents when I'm teaching kids, when they're afraid of what their kids are writing about. And I would always tell these kids' parents, your child can be Charles Manson or Stephen King. And to me, I always say one person is carrying out these acts, the other one is writing about it. And I had to go in and I write, and I wrote. And that's how I always learned how to process anger and use healthy anger. And I wanted to share this poem that I created because to me it was, I really just wrote it when Lisa asked me about being on this panel. Because as a man, I go back to 2018, and I say it was emotionally one of the worst years of my life. I felt emotionally, didn't know how to really process it because I felt like it was a year that Black women really didn't like Black men. And I never felt unloved. I was raised by a single mother with my grandma. I never felt unloved by Black women in my life until 2017, 2018. I felt the most unloved. And it did something to me. It really, really bothered me. I'm fine with not being loved by the rest of the world. I would never be okay with not being loved by Black women. And I felt so empty. If you tried to open your mouth and say something, you was mansplaining, but you're just trying to process things. You didn't understand stuff, right? You was beaten to this submission that I had been beaten into my entire life. But I also came to grips that the way they making me feel, maybe I made them feel like that's their whole life. So I had to get over myself. So I wrote this poem in response because this is the only way I knew how to process it. And this is where my anger goes. This is how I use anger to push myself forward. Because I remember this lady in this bird telling me, I looked in my eyes and saw me one day with all this repressed anger. She said, you're gonna blow up on somebody. It's gonna be the people you love. It's not gonna be good. Because I was afraid of that, releasing anger. And it always stayed in the back of my head. And as I reached the age of 40, never thinking I would, having to deal with that and then dealing with life after. Because now you're here. Mm-hmm. You gotta pay these student loans back and do all the other stuff, but I'm at 40, right, and deal with this anger. So I wanted to share this as my closeout because to me is I think it's a great representation of men that grew up like me and how we're taught that anger is not good. And I named it Lake Minnetonka. If you haven't seen Purple Rain, shame on you. But I named it Lake Minnetonka because Prince, told Apollonia to purify yourself. You have to jump in Lake Minnetonka. And so it's about purifying yourself. Man up, head up. You better not cry. Men don't do that. You mama's boy, titty baby,
crybaby, soft ass, pussy. See, black men are beaten into having emotional constipation from the time we enter this world. So people shouldn't be shocked when we explode and shit on our women, children, communities. Fuck talking to friends, counselors, your pastors, Iana, or self. We'd rather lay our burdens at the altar of weed and Hennessy. But I've never been a smoker or a drinker. To numb my pain, I use jiggling tits and shaking tail at retail. You see, it's funny how a lap dance and a pair of new kicks can put you in a trance. But at the end of the song, and after a few scuffs, that feeling is gone. Seems like we lost the battle with our demons, so we became them. Abel's killer, hooked on Cain, rolling river, Ike Turner's brain. Eve smacking, love lacking. Damn, what happened? Purify me, purify me, purify me. Late when I talk.
Hard to follow that. Lisa asked each of us to talk about who we are and what we do outside of union. So I thought about that and I said, who I am feels closely related to anger. Not anger like I'm ready to fight, at least not most times, or to argue, but a little bit of anger that keeps me on guard wherever I go. Why? Because I'm an African American, which means I'm a minority almost all the times in a majority place. Because I'm a woman in a man's world. They always remember that song, it's a man's world, they always forget, but it ain't nothing without a woman and a girl. So it's always a man's world. I'm a Christian in a country that often makes me feel embarrassed to be associated with some of the people who call themselves Christians. I'm a pastor on sabbatical until I finish this degree, but by being clergy, most people decide whether or not they dislike or distrust me before I even open my mouth. Every aspect of who I am continually feels like it is under question or under fire. As a result, I believe I walk around most times with at least a little bit of anger. Now, I might not show it often. In fact, most times I probably have a smile on my face, and I am a generally happy person. The two can't exist in the same space. However, somewhere in the back of my mind, I always expect that at any point, regardless of where I am, I expect that someone is going to say or do something that is in direct opposition or offense to me, whether purposely or not. Because of how I look and what I represent, they will underestimate me and overlook me. They will critique me or challenge me, but rarely will they accept and respect me without me proving myself over and over again. And no matter how many times I see you nod, no matter how many times you prove yourself, you got to show up the next day and prove yourself over yet again. So my personal and professional statement is I'm certainly in support of anger. Not because I aspire to be angry, but because I've given myself permission to be angry. Because I often have something to be angry about. Now, anger has to be tempered with love, and I'll get there in a minute. But is anybody here other than myself a Trekkie fan? Okay, I mean the old Star Trek, right? Then they started making the movies, and I know that movies are fiction, but movies often have a grain of truth, and they can be some of the most profound things and have the most truthful points about life. And there was a part in the Star Trek movie number 4. Don't know if you saw it or not, but there's this time where I think the antagonist's name is Loki or something like that, and he takes away the anger and the pain and everything from the other crewmen, and so they walk around like Stepford wives. They're just happy, they're not upset about anything. Life is good. It doesn't matter that you took me off the ship. I'm just happy. I'm just filled with joy. And for whatever reason, I can't remember, Captain Kirk, he hasn't been affected. And so they keep telling him, you know, come on along, it's gonna be great. You know, his friends have now turned on him. Spock and their Bones have turned on him. They're like, come over to this side, it'll be so good. Let go of all of this stuff. And I remember, I don't remember what year this was, but Captain Kirk said something that stuck out to me then and has always stuck with me since then. He said, he was talking to Bones, and he said, you know that pain and guilt can't be taken away with the wave of a magic wand. He said, there are things that we carry with us, the things that make us who we are. If we lose them, we lose ourselves. He said, I don't want my pain taken away. I need my pain. My mother, there's a lot of things that have happened to me in my life. And my mother always said, I wish you'd have gone away to college and this wouldn't happen and that wouldn't happen and that wouldn't happen. But it's all of those things that have happened in my life that make me angry, that I can look at somebody else. When I see another woman get abused by their husband or their spouse, or a man get abused by their husband or their spouse, I can relate to that because I've been there, and it brings out that anger. That anger, not to just be angry, but that anger that she was just talking about that says somebody's crossed a line. So anger is like pain. It's a natural emotion. It's response to things that have happened around us. We've already been told that. So I said, okay, just because you have an emotion doesn't mean that you should live it. It doesn't make that it's okay. But I think about things like Mothers Against Drunk Driving. They purposely made that mad, right?
Yes.
Mothers Against Drunk Driving. Nobody mad at the mothers for losing their, being mad about losing their children. As a pastor, you would think that I preach against anger, and I often do, because from a biblical point of view, anger could be a very bad thing. You know, Psalm 37:8 says, refrain from anger and forsake wrath. Fret not yourself, it tends only to evil. Proverbs 15:1 says, a soft answer turns away wrath, but a harsh word stirs up anger. Ephesians 4:31, let all bitterness and wrath and anger and clamor and slander be put away from you, along with all malice. Jesus said, but I say to you that everyone who is angry with his brother will be liable to judgment. Whoever insults his brother will be liable to the council, and whoever says you fool will be liable to the fires of hell. Scared me. I was like, I can't be angry. I got it. But Christians, along with various other faiths, teach against the dangers of anger. However, somebody say however. Right? There's always, we don't live in just a black and white world, right? We live in a world that also has gray. There's context, there's circumstances. It gets complicated. And so the letter of the law says that, you know, anger is not a good thing, but the Spirit says that anger is going to get us to where we want to be in our humanity. Spirit says that anger is natural, and in some cases it's integral to justice. God does discourage anger as a first or quick response, or even for prolonged periods of time, not because we don't have reason to be angry, but to avoid allowing anger to take over us and eat us alive, right? That's why we have to forgive. Yet anger yielded correctly can both be cathartic and motivating. James 1:19-20 says, you must understand this, my beloved. Let everyone be quick to listen, slow to speak, slow to anger, right? For your anger does not produce God's righteousness. Thus, we have to remember that there are two kinds of anger. There is the anger of man, the kind that we talk about that causes mass shootings and killing your spouse, domestic abuse, and all of the different things that happen there. But then there's the anger that does achieve the righteousness of God. We're told in Ephesians 4:26-27, be angry. The word says be angry, right? But do not sin. Do not let the sun go down on your anger, and do not make room for the devil. You see, religious and or moral people should get angry, not in a judgmental, self-righteous, or condemning way to others, right? But when we should get angry when we witness injustice, unfairness, inequity, suppression, oppression, all of the isms, the racisms, the sexisms, the classisms, because God hates all of those things. Proverbs 16-19 says, there are 6 things that the Lord hates, 7 that are an abomination to him: haughty eyes, a lying tongue, and hands that shed innocent blood, a heart that devises wicked plans, feet that hurry and run to evil, a lying witness who testifies falsely, and one who sows discord in a family. So God expects us to get angry when we see those things just like he does. And then I said, okay, well, Christians, I'm a Christian pastor. I don't apologize for that. But it's not just Christians, okay? I went to Gandhi. We all know about Gandhi, right? His grandson, Arun Gandhi, has written a book based on many of the lessons he learned from his grandfather. The book is entitled The Gift of Anger. From Gandhi, Mahatma Gandhi. He said, a gift of anger. He says his grandfather taught him that whenever we see injustice, we should get involved. Arun goes on to say that he learned something from his grandfather that was very unusual, which was channeling anger. He says of growing up that he always felt like anger was something that he should be ashamed of and deny and suppress. But we know what happens when you bury feelings, right? They don't go away. They stay there, and later on they blow up. That's how you get some of the craziness that happens. He said, but in fact, his grandfather said, anger is a good thing. It is a very powerful emotion. And he used the analogy of electricity to say that anger is just like electricity. It is useful and good if we use it intelligently, right? But it can be deadly and destructive if we abuse it. So just as we channel electrical energy and bring it into our lives and use it for the good of humanity, we must learn to channel anger in the same way so that we can use that energy for the good of humanity rather than abuse it. And then I said, oh, okay, let me go to the Muslim religion. They get a bad rap. They're always, we were worried about whether or not we're going to war and terrorists, and we think one way. But religion teaches us really how to behave when we don't abuse it. Dr. Shahid Athar says, a person who has no feelings about oppression, wrongdoing, and disbelief is in fact an impotent person emotionally. It has been said, evil flourishes when a few good people do not do anything to oppose it. Thus, response to injustice and operation in a civilized way is the appropriate expression of anger. Being neutral to injustice is equal to contributing to justice. That anger is that indication that something wrong. Dr. King is the one who, everybody talks about how peaceful Dr. King is, how peaceful Dr. King was. Oh, he's just, just walk around, just never doing, like they talk about Jesus. But Jesus turned over the tables in the temple. Jesus went after the hypocritical Sadducees and Pharisees and Sanhedrin and talked about how hard their hearts were and how they were just okay with things that went on. Jesus got angry. And Martin Luther King, there's a few things that they say about him. Clarence Jones worked as an attorney and speechwriter for King. And he talks of a time in 1963 when he went to go see King in jail in Birmingham, Alabama. Jones was hoping to talk about how to raise bail for the imprisoned protesters. But King was preoccupied with a full-page ad that he had seen in the local newspaper. It was an open letter by the local white clergyman, and it said King should leave the city. And it didn't have a word about the injustice and the segregation that was going on. So King was very angry, recalls Jones. King's response, initially scribbled on the scraps of paper he had in his cell, is the famous letter from a Birmingham jail. His anger propelled him to write one of the most powerful pieces of persuasive writing ever. He passionately explained the principles of nonviolent protest and the righteous, justifiable anger of African Americans. John Blake writes an article, How MLK Became an Angry Black Man. He said, before everything else, the Birmingham letter is a black man's cry of pain, anger, and defiance. He looks at the furious truth teller that is revealed in King's classic letter. King's blackness, his fierce racial pride, his distinctively black Christian faith, and his belief that most whites were unconscious racists is on full display in his letter, scholars say. The anger that drove King's letter would become more prominent in the speeches King gave until literally his last hours. James Cone, liberation theologist, said, if you love somebody and they hurt, you are hurt too. King identified with black people who had experienced injustice and humiliation. You can't look at that and not get mad. The last thing that I have is Yolanda Pierce. She wrote on righteous anger, Black Lives Matter, and the legacy of King. In her June 1981 keynote presentation at the National Women's Studies Association, she said, one of the best responses to racism is anger, stating that her belief that anger can serve as collective surgery against exclusion, privilege, stereotyping, and betrayal. Every woman has a well-stocked arsenal of anger, potentially useful against those oppressors, personal and institutional, which brought that anger into being. Focused with precision, it can become a powerful force of energy, serving progress and change. I am speaking of a basic and radical alteration in those assumptions underlying our lives. Anger is loaded with information and energy. It is critical to connect the concept of righteous anger to the work of freedom movements because it is easy to sanitize the full scope of a movement and to reduce the activists of the civil rights movement to cardboard characters instead of fully human persons experiencing the entire range of human emotions. Yes, many activists who participated in the civil rights movement upheld ethics of nonviolent resistance. But the movement itself was extremely violent for those on the underside of history. Dogs, water hoses, lynch mobs, and police batons were routinely used to subdue those who dared to challenge unjust laws. And yes, many activists, spurred by their religious faith, upheld love as their highest moral tenet. And yet that love for all humanity was not antithetical to an anger at injustice.
I think I'm just gonna open it up to a few questions and we'll do some other things, then maybe come back to more discussion. So, because I'm sure some people have some things to say. So let's take a few questions right now.
Yes, I think Audrey maybe can answer to this question. I feel a huge issue with specifically the African American community is that we are taught from a very young age that Jesus is our therapy. And I'm just specifically thinking of my brother in my head as you three were talking. He is, I think, 22. A lot of trauma as a kid, and I can see his anger and his trauma is manifesting in like the most horrible ways, like through domestic violence with women, drug abuse, trafficking, and I feel he's on the path of early grace. And so my dad's a pastor. I love my parents, but when I talk to them, I'm like, he needs therapy. And, you know, since he's a pastor, you know, he's like, have him come to Sunday school. You know, and my mom, of course, is married to him, so she supports, you know, what he does. And we have these very conflictual arguments. I'm like, Mom, you know, you can still love Jesus and go to therapy.
Yes.
And another thing with this is my brother said if he does go to therapy, he wants to go to a Black therapist. And this is another thing I feel is huge, you know, like when you have therapy, you want to be able to relate to someone that can understand your culture. And so I feel a huge, huge thing, and it's because of our upbringing. How can you teach the Black community that you can still love Jesus and receive therapy?
I'm going to say it's absolutely huge in the African American community to be averse to therapy and to say, call on Jesus and pray. Those are two most powerful things you can do, but they're also not practical things. And you know, it's one thing, that would be the same as my daughter getting hit by a car and me praying over and not taking her to the hospital. Yeah, you pray, you accompany action with prayer. Prayer is about action. And to acknowledge that, you know, mental health is huge. I mean, there's and I know that she can speak to it. There's chemical emotions and things that, you know, talk about clinical depression and you talk about PTSD and things that people have gone through without being taught how to channel that. Because you've got one of two ways. Pain and struggle and trauma either makes you stronger. I mean, he's raising his two nieces, nephews, I'm not sure which they are, right? And he could have just, you know, gone down a spiral, but apparently he had the tools that he needed to do this constructively for people who haven't seen it, and for people who have had religion hit them over the head. I can say, being a PK and having kids, I try not to say, pray about it, baby. First thing, I go practical, and then I say, and then let's pray. And we just act like as religion, God is going to reach down and take you out of, you're just going to feel better one day, pray, good. You've got to work at channeling anger. You have to work at getting healthy. And a lot of times the best way to do that is going to be somebody outside of your family, and a Christian counselor. Black Christian counselor is what I would recommend.
Another question?
I wanted to feed off of that if possible. I'm actually a therapist myself, and I got into mental health after a sentence trying to be an educator and realizing that a lot of the issues that I saw that I would, contribute to helping people resolve were a little bit deeper than I had initially, expected. And so when I came to mental health, I thought it was very interesting in my training that there were all these asides. Well, this is how, cultural competence or responsiveness looks when you deal with an Asian community, or this Asian community, or this Asian American community, or African Americans, and it kind of be glossed over. But one day I came across this book that came close to what I thought I was feeling myself over the years and what kind of brought me to mental health. And I grew up in a really impoverished family and neighborhood, two different ones, and I saw a lot of the issues brought on by systemic violence it's like capitalism and systems were like dirty words. People didn't want to address that. People were being responsive within their abilities and their environments. They were responding to their environments. And so all I heard was blame to people who really were being victimized. And when I came to, I found this book called Black Rage. I think you all probably have heard of David Allen Greer. His father, a Black psychologist, wrote this book. I forgot the name of his co-writer, but the book was really important. It was written in the 70s of all times, a very radical, time for radical thinking. And he showed case studies of these individuals who had been institutionalized in and out of institutions, Black individuals, and their responses to their lives, often repressed. Over time, repression kind of led to this person losing their job at the factory. They had worked so hard to assimilate, become managers, make sure all of their white colleagues treated them with respect, but they still had to come in through the back door. Some stereotypical stuff, but it was things that, we today would think, I'm not doing that. But back then, that was what they had to do to get by. And then all of a sudden, the pot boiled over. And so this man wrote case studies of how these people's reactions were specific to racism, sexism within the Black community in response to outside white supremacist violence pushing in on them. And I said, that's what I'm getting at. That's what I'm getting at. Mm-hmm. And I bring it up in my curriculum, and luckily I had an advisor that definitely understood me. But then I got out into my internship, and all of my supervisors were white, and they were just like, well, what happens if you have clients that don't have the same interests? And they would always word it very uniquely.
Yeah.
And I'm like, what do you mean about my interests? I was like, this is something that I think like millions of people can respond to. I was like, do you know what it was like for me to look for a therapist that understood that a lot of my anger came from systemic violence, my experience as a Black woman? Well, yeah, I can see how that would manifest in anxiety and depression. And I'm just like, not the same anxiety and depression says. I wish I could tell you. But I think that over time, I became more comfortable, even in, doing community work, with saying, this is a space for us, for you to be vulnerable. And it was amazing to me because I didn't think I'd get the response that I got from these Black women in my community. I thought people would be like dropping in, getting their muffins and tea, and people actually sat down and said, we never thought of creating a space like this, because whenever we have tried to have time to talk about our anxiety and depression, it would be in church. And people would offer this, and they tell us to pray, and we do want to pray, but we also want to get mad. Yes. Yeah.
And I didn't expect that. Even as I opened the space up, but I didn't expect it. And I said, well, I feel like I'm on the right track, because I feel like if you need to get mad, then what I need to do is, if I have the capacity to do that. So I definitely.
Thank you. So in the program, it says that this panel is called 101 Ways to Channel and transform anger. And I mean, the entire time coming up with exactly 101, but maybe we can come up with a dozen together. And you know, I'd love to hear, you know, some ideas. What do you do with anger that's productive? We're in a social justice program. Ostensibly, we're all angry. I hope you're angry. I really do. That's why I'm here, you know. So, you know, so we can go to school. That's something we can do with our anger. I'm going to start off the list with pray, because, you know, I'm a therapist too. Actually, Greta and she came that's how we know each other. And, you know, I specialize in trauma and addiction. And I sit with clients all day long who really, I think the thread is that what we're getting at, that they have never expressed anger. They've never been allowed to. In whatever their culture, it's not, you know, it's not just in Black culture, white culture too. I mean, you know, the kind of the perfect white, you know, very, very, very neat and 1950s American dream. You know, dad drinks up his anger, and you know, mom takes her Valium, and nobody gets pissed. You know, so you know, we are just trained, whether in, you know, in Black culture or white culture, we are just trained in our Western thinking that anger is dangerous.
Can I add number 2 to that list? To practice gratitude.
Yes.
And
So,
I want to give an example right now,
okay.
if that's okay. Shakima, you have been one of the most influential people in my career as a therapist. Even though I was your alumni fellow coming in, teaching you how to do the program, you taught me how to sit back, shut the fuck up, and listen. And because of you, I was able to engage in my program at Union. And because of you, I seek out therapists who are people of color, first generation, and can give me something that I do not have. Because one of the things that I go to therapy for is to fill spaces and tools that I don't know that I have yet. And because of my collaboration and work with you, I have been more courageous to seek out those places of discomfort and to seek out those places where I still need to grow.
I love you, Greta.
That's awesome. So just to finish what I was saying is that, you know, I have people that come to me and they've never been allowed to have anger, to process anger, to express anger, which means that they have never completed the cycle of grief.
It's true.
We are all grieving. We are all grieving.
Yes.
Everyone here, one way or another.
Mm-hmm.
And we experience everything else on the spectrum, you know, and if you're familiar with the 5 stages of grief, you know, there's denial, there's depression, there's acceptance, there's all those things that we may or may not have experienced, but the one thing that we just keep pushing down and procrastinating on, or we don't even know it, but we're repressing it, is the anger piece. Until we reach in, pull that out, look at it, put it on the table, and process it, we are not going to heal.
Mm-hmm.
And we're not going to complete that grieving process. So I tell people, pray, practice gratitude, prayer and/or gratitude, because it really just helps with the process. So I do think that yes, we need action. Prayer is action, as long as we're doing something to accompany that. Yes.
I would also say creating a safe place for support groups.
Awesome.
I'm a pastor also, and one of the things that I've seen with people that I talk to is that there are so many people who are angry, and one big part of that issue is that they haven't been able to express those things. And in my earlier stages, I worked a lot with youth, and I still do now because I'm also an educator. And even in my own personal experience, one of the things that was an issue for me growing up and having so much anger was that I didn't have anyone that I could talk to. Even being in church, you know, I didn't feel like I could talk to my pastor, you know, because as a young person, having a parent who speaks against what you want to express, you know, it makes it a bit difficult. And so creating support groups for adults who haven't dealt with childhood issues, and then even creating a support system for children, because wounded children become wounded adults.
Yes.
You know, and so dealing with those issues before, you know, they get out into the world and they're releasing these things in the wrong way, you know, having that support system there, sometimes just to listen, you know, is very helpful.
Playlist. I think music, creating a
Yeah.
proper playlist, like so through PH Balance, the poetry and healing sessions that we have, I DJ. I'm a DJ, so I'm responsible for curating and making sure that what's coming out of those speakers are like guided sessions, right? Because people come up with some heavy stuff. So making sure proper playlists are in place for you, whatever it takes to get you centered. Like music is definitely therapy, and it takes you places. I can wake up some mornings and I wake up with songs in my head, like this morning, and it literally changes the rest of my day. And the other P I would say is perspective, like having the perspective of anger. I live by the perspective of no one has the power to ruin my day. That's too much power for me to give.
Yeah.
I may not live to see the next one. So you may ruin an hour, you may ruin a minute, you can't ruin my day. And I've convinced myself of that, right? And you know, that's the perspective I have on life. So I go through the 5 stages of grief, like really quickly, because I've trained myself to do that. Like you guys, like my younger cousin, soon to be 2-year-old son was killed Sunday night. Here, since I've been here. And you wouldn't know that, you know what I'm saying? So it's like, I've been able to deal and process and deal with family and go through all this stuff and not hold things because I've created a process, right? And a practice to be able to get out of that. So people being able to create those practices and process and go head up with grief instead of like medicating through drugs and things like that, it becomes so much easier. Right. You know, it's not easy, it becomes easier as you go through the process. So I would say practice and playlists.
I would say learn to be more angry at the action than the person. There's no good and bad people, right? Because all of us make good and bad decisions.
Yes.
So again, going back scripturally, Paul says we wrestle not against flesh and blood. We get mad at people, but we wrestle really against the evil that created that. The person who beat you was probably beaten. You know, the person that raped somebody was already raped. So what we need to redirect anger to a lot of what we see are symptoms of a larger problem. So you take that and you direct it towards the solutions of what's creating the anger, rather than just hating the person or mad at the person who did what they did to you.
That's correct.
Well, I was going to say that one. That's great. All my life, I have been told not to raise my voice. Now I can't raise my voice at all.
Right. Speak out, Dr. Burns.
And my parents, one thing they agreed about was, you don't raise your voice. Don't raise your voice. You just, whatever happens to your anger, you just let it happen, but you don't raise your voice. Now, with my wife, I have the same issue where she's always telling me, even when I speak like this, let's say, she would say, I'm raising my voice. She could yell and, you know, scream, and she's not raising her voice, but she tells me not to raise my voice. I don't know. I think the effect of that is that it made me, it suppressed me. It made me, you know, people see me as a soft-spoken person, which I think is a good thing. But I think a lot of it is because I was suppressed from, you know, practically from birth to not raise my voice. And so I really was suppressed and silenced. And in nursery school, for 2 years in nursery school, I did not utter a single word. I was so suppressed in that way. So I have huge reservoirs of anger within me, and I try to channel them being an activist, toward activism. I mean, that's so activism is one way that I would suggest to channel it, but also to validate your anger, even if sometimes it gets out of control. Sometimes you do things but if you can aim it at the situation and not at the person, then that can still be healthy.
I want to yell and scream for you. I just had this empathetic feeling like I was picturing little Dr. Burns. And I just wanted to be like, scream, kid, just scream. So I'm going to put yell.
I wish you had been there.
Yell and scream and sing.
That's right.
Sing,
Yep.
sing.
Vocally, getting that outlet, getting it out vocally. Greta?
And to speak a little bit more to that, Dr. Burns, getting back in touch with one's body.
Yeah.
To actually feel through rather than to just react or respond. So when we suppress our voice, we actually deny the vagal responses communication between your body and your brain. It actually goes right behind the vocal cords, and it is the nerve that relays all of the information in your body up into your brain.
That vibration is so important,
And so finding not only reconnection with the smaller sensations that our body feels before it builds up into the bigger kinds of anger, but to recognize feeling bothered and feeling frustrated and feeling a little irritated are all forms of anger too. And to become more familiar and refamiliar with what those sensations are in your body and finding a safe place to discharge that, because it's an energetic storage, right? One of the things that we practice in this is my office too, by the way, is proprioception with anger. So moving the body in ways that the sympathetic, the parasympathetic, and the vagal system are all activated so that energy is discharged. And then you can use the information that the anger has given you to do something out of action and proactive response rather than as reactive.
Cool. Chad, did you have your hand up?
Yes, I think Dr. Burns began going down a road that and we didn't finish it, but activism, Public Enemy said, fight the power. That whatever system or structure, particularly if not individual, system or structure that created the injustice for you, use that anger to turn around and fight that system or structure to make sure, if possible, that the injustice does not happen again, to ameliorate it or at least minimize it from happening to someone else.
Yeah.
Kind of like what KD was saying about Jordan, saying, the Pistons came up with the Jordan rule, so I'm gonna get in the gym and put on some weight to make sure this doesn't happen to me again.
Yeah.
And so I think that's, again, this to start off by talking about we're here because we're angry, and there are so many things that happen, because we're angry. Married with the Good Sam thing, we had the Klan and came to Dayton, and when I found out they were coming, I was angry. So I got some people together and we went down and we raised hell. So just use that anger to fight injustice.
Mm-hmm.
I just say, write your anger out.
Good. Yeah, I just have
Poetry.
Yeah.
someone shout something out. I want to say, that getting it out of your body. How many people have ever done sports, maybe as a kid or as an adult, to get it out of your body?
Yes.
Yeah. I work with some teenagers, and I have one girl I work with. She's on the soccer team. Oh man, she's vicious. She's like, I just love to kick that ball. It's great. Yeah.
We can sit there and think about the movie Waterboy. Like anybody else saw the movie?
Yeah. Yes.
Trained him like
Yeah. I want to say, because I'm thinking like, I would say you need to write that vision, but you also need to be able, we say we're angry, but you need to be able to articulate what you're angry about.
Yeah.
Have a full word, because a lot of times, and know who you are. There's a sense in knowing who we are as people, because a lot of times we're angry and we're mad, but we can't articulate what we're mad. a lot of times we don't know who we are. And because we don't know who we are as people, you know, and accept who we are, I mean, like Amy's values, Amy's weaknesses, then we allow all these different distractions, and then we're just mad and don't have a sense of direction on how to cure that or how to deal with that distraction.
Absolutely, and it, you know, and I talk about it like naming, it's like naming a spirit or an energy, and then you gotta capture it, and name it, and identify what that is. Yes.
I just want to piggyback on what you said, Amy. I think first giving yourself permission to have the feeling, and I think sometimes identifying the feeling is maybe not necessarily giving it a name. I think we get hung up on labels, and then sometimes we lose sight of the feeling. And so to just identify an emotion, that it is an emotion, then unpack that so you can get to the root of that, and then start to heal from that, because it's not necessarily the anger, it's what caused the anger to bring about healing.
Maxwell?
I'm just sitting here. I came to this panel because of the word anger. I feel like I'm sitting here for therapy myself. Me too. I don't know what it is. I just listen to everyone. You know, I use inspiration, motivating speakers. Now, since I've been in this program, to get through this program, I don't know what I'm angry about, but irritation starts it. I get irritated. So I don't know why. So yeah, I'm listening.
Great, thank you.
I guess I should say support.
Thank you. Thanks for being here.
So something that just goes back to creating support groups. Something that I found really important for me to practice that was not easy but was so necessary in my personal development is when you start to recognize these things early on, maybe you're confused and don't know where to start, or the people you're supporting are confused and don't know where to start. What was really helpful to me is being able, teaching myself and practicing receiving it. Because I came to a point where I was in spaces with really supportive, amazing people, and they had no experience with my background, and that was fine. But they were willing to support me and listen to me. And a lot of times when you're not used to that, you have been conditioned to a different type of response, you push that away. So I encourage you, even if it's not you, even if it's somebody in your life and you're trying to support them and they can't receive it, maybe be patient with them, but also continue to encourage them to say, hey, can you identify what's happening right now? Like, do you know that I'm actually here for you? Like, maybe you can't receive it, but just know that when you're ready for that, I'm here, because they're not initially necessarily going to respond in the way that we expect. We're not going to respond that way. Like, sometimes it makes, like Retta says, some emotions are complex. There are multiple emotions at once. Like, grief is something that a lot of us feel, again, when we're, expressing anger. And grief sits in your throat.
Sorry, go ahead. Well, I just want to piggyback on what Shakima was saying, because I was going to say grieving. Yeah. Because KD talked about grief. And I think that part of anger, like, if we get angry but we don't allow ourselves to grieve, I'm a big crier. You will know that over time. I'm happy and sad and I'm overwhelmed and all the things. But I think that's healthy, like to grieve and allow yourself time to have an outpouring of that emotion, so that you can get on with it, right?
Please. I appreciated everything you all had to say. But Pastor, when I was shaking my head with you, one of the things that I get angry about is the microaggressions of women, but Black women, and how we do have to work hard and then always have to be on point. And even in knowing that, it's a learning curve that I have to understand. My pastor used to always say, when you're trying to talk, I would talk to people and he would say, Amy, why are you always spiritually trying to deal with some carnal people sometimes? What you have to do is be able to, meet people where they are, but you don't leave them there and you bring them with you. Right. And so what I'm learning and how to even deal with that is a process. Right. But to be able to try to articulate it to people and then try to bring them so that they will understand. That can be a slow process, but it's something that working toward and trying to apply it. But that has been, I really appreciated what you said, because that it's so subliminal, but it is.
Yes, every day.
We're coming to the end here, so I want to get in a couple of things.
Right.
Greta?
Just a quick word of caution. As you allow yourself and give yourself permission to feel anger, all of the other emotions that were also numbed by numbing anger will come forward too. So please make sure, like everyone's been saying, that you have the support around you to give yourself the freedom and permission to not only feel the anger, but to feel all the other things that will come up too.
Matt just handed me this thing from, what center is this? Oh, Yale Center for Emotional Intelligence. It says, as readers reflect during Dr. King's birthday on his work and legacy, we at the center offer Ruler, our approach to social and emotional learning, as a lens through which to examine the anger so many have felt in the past few months. Ruler is an acronym here. I think we've covered a lot of these things. We have only a couple minutes. I want to get to the part about what we do. Like, what do we do now? Okay, so if we accept my theory or premise that anger gets a bad rap, and that we need to learn as a society to separate anger from violence.
Yes.
It's not fair. It's not fair to anger. Anger needs room. It needs space. It needs to exist, and we have to allow it in, and we have to process it. We've got to get things done. We've got to put anger into action. We have to. And it's going to be drop by drop. It's going to be little by little. It's going to take a really long time. But in my lifetime, I have seen, for instance, stereotypes like now you see more and more men staying at home. I've seen shifts in gender roles. I've seen transgenderism coming out and being more open, more accepted. So change takes a long time, but it is possible. So we may not see it happen in our lifetime, but I feel like it's a social justice issue that we need to encourage anger, discourage violence, and and keep a really clear delineation between those things. Does anyone have a closing question or something that they want to say in closing? I thank you so much for coming today. I really appreciate it. Thank you, Greta, for zooming in.
Thank you for the meeting.
Have a great rest of your conference day, folks.
Bye.
I now have a solution thanks to you.
Awesome job. Good job.
My family was over here.